Welcome to Alwa's Awakening, an unashamedly nostalgic love letter to the Metroidvania classics of bygone eras, with its stripped-back 8-bit visuals, its chiptune soundtrack full of catchy themes, and its simple yet precise gameplay mechanisms. Zoe, the purple-robed protagonist of Alwa's Awakening, only really needs a couple of buttons aside from the D-pad. She can jump, hit things with her magical staff, and do a spot of magic by pressing up and attack. She'll collect 3 magic stones during her adventures, allowing her to do things like conjure a block or create a bubble that can be used as a platform for a second or two. But this is all conducted via 3 buttons and directions. There's no getting used to the controls, no need to acclimatise. It's the very definition of pick up and play. Alwa's Awakening becomes a game that's all about planning your route from one side of the screen to the other, avoiding traps, spikes, projectiles and enemies, and hopping from perilous rocks to hovering platforms. It's simple and straightforward, easing players into proceedings with a non-threatening first half hour. The challenge increases as you realise that save points are sometimes very few and far between. Zoe can only take 3 hits from an enemy before she falls, and she can't swim. She also perishes instantly if even one of her pixels comes into contact with the many spikes that adorn the walls, floors and ceilings of some of Alwa's dungeons and low places. It's telling that the game has a death counter. The developers understand that you're likely to fail at times, but none of the deaths ever felt cheap. I never became frustrated with the game when Zoe died for the umpteenth time, even if I did sometimes lament the long trek back to where I'd been before. The game isn't exactly brutal in its difficulty, but it is challenging in places, though mostly in terms of trying to navigate the map. There are some all too hidden passages and fake walls that might leave you scratching your head at times. I do, however, need to set some praise aside for the game's soundtrack. In my opinion, it's very easy to make terrible chiptune music. In fact, I go as far as to say that over 95% of chiptune music made since the turn of the millennium is awful. But Robert Kreis's soundtrack for this game is excellent. It's repetitive without ever becoming too annoying, instead getting stuck in your head in that perfect manner so you find yourself unconsciously humming themes to yourself long after you put the controller down. It's that classic retro repetition, just enough to get stuck in your head, not quite enough to make you climb the walls in frustration. And the soundtrack here is probably my favourite thing about the game. It immediately roots me in a very specific time in my life, creating a sonic spell that only gets broken once I've exited proceedings. There are other things too that make this game a pretty great time capsule in a way. I mean, the sprites are well made, but they're not crystal sharp. The backgrounds don't have fancy parallax scrolling, and yet they look pretty in their own way. The trouble is that since before Shovel Knight was a twinkle in a developer's eye, Steam has been home to plenty of games like this. Every week there's a new retro-styled action platformer or shmup desperately trying to capture the glories of yesteryear, so does Alwa's Awakening stand out? And the answer is not really at first glance. But closer inspection reveals a gaming homage that really commits to its backwards-looking approach. Instead of blending retro aesthetics with a dusting of modern concessions, as was the case with Shovel Knight, this game is determined to go back several decades and resurrect classic vibes, warts and all. And in doing this, the developers at Eldin Pixels actively restrict their own toolset, of course, but there is a welcome purity in design that comes with such a pared-down approach, even if it does impinge on the game's variety. That being said, some things are stripped down a little too much. The story is forgettable nonsense, but at least the game doesn't really waste your time with its narrative awfulness beyond the introduction. The boss battles are a little disappointing too, unable to deliver much by way of variety given Zoe's limited skill set, and the game is also a bit on the brief side. It's padded out by encouraging players to collect 99 blue orbs hidden in various nooks and crannies of the game world, and in typical Metroidvania fashion, some are only accessible once you've unlocked later powers and then return to early areas. But the game suggests that the more orbs you collect, the more powerful you'll become. However, in practice, they really don't have much of a bearing on anything, which is quite a shame. It sort of feels like a completely missed opportunity there. Yet I find myself coming away from Alwa's Awakening with a smile on my face rather than a frown, and that might be because I'm still humming the music, but I feel it has more to do with the fact that this is a game that knows exactly what it wants to be and delivers in really solid fashion. Alwa's Awakening is a worthy nostalgia trip for retro fans. By keeping things simple and letting the design talk more than the story, Eldin Pixels have crafted a solid and satisfying puzzle platformer with one heck of a soundtrack. No, it won't blow your mind, but it might make you feel warm and fuzzy inside, especially if you're over the age of 30.